everyone. Welcome back. This is the Quay Acceleration Podcast. We are now Quay Acceleration. Used to be WEVE and Cela. We've come together as one brand, one operation over the last couple of years, and have picked a new name and new brand in order to represent that. So welcome back. This podcast is all about showcasing the best of the ecosystem that Quay has built for the startups and its accelerators. That means we're here to bring forward the best entrepreneurs, the best mentors, the best technology experts, the best investors, to tell you more about what's going on in the accelerator ecosystem and also how you can get involved as either one of our startups or one of our mentors. So we are going to be speaking with each of our guests about their background, how they got to where where they are, some of the learnings that they've had along the way, highs in that experience, lows in that experience, and then give you some recommendations so you can either build on their success or avoid some of the pain that they've experienced. So that's what we're here to do today with Chip Massey, who has an amazing story as an ex-FBI negotiator and now the co-founder of the Convincing Company, which works with all kinds of businesses in order to up their executives' game when it comes to having hard conversations and achieving business outcomes through those conversations. So we're going to start off with Chip telling us a little bit about what the Convincing Company does from his perspective, and then we'll get into his background. So Chip, thank you for joining. We are so proud to have you here. Yeah. So proud to have you in our network and our ecosystem. Thank you for all the contributions you make to our entrepreneurs and our programs.
Of course.
In your own words, what's going on at the Convincing Company?
Right. So we are an immersive training and crisis communications company primarily. So we take on when there is a business that's having difficulty either with brand or personnel and they know they're in a danger zone, they call us on how to handle that, how to get through that. The other is an immersive training experience where we take teams and executives through a hostage negotiation experience, something that you're familiar with. John is one of our stars that went through this course, and it is a means of how you can think with clarity under stressful situations, how you can bring your teams up to be high performance, and how to function under stress with limited information and still make good decisions.
Sound familiar, startup entrepreneurs? What kind of companies do you usually like to work with?
It runs the gamut. It really does. The spectrum ranges from small to mid to large. It really does. So if people are trying to figure out, hey, I know that my team could be working better, or I have a sense that, something's coming down the pike, we've got ourselves in a bad situation and we need some guidance, we need some help. Maybe it's just preliminary. So whether that's crisis comms or whether it's training, we'll do that for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. We have ourselves put some of our entrepreneurs through the workshops that Chip and Adele, his co-founder, have designed, and they've also published a book on this topic. So do you want to tell us about what's contained there?
Right. So the title of that book is Convince Me. So it's kind of like, how do you handle high-stakes situations, negotiate, and what we would differentiate is it's not really a negotiation, it's convincing. But we tend to call things negotiations in general. But it's all about developing that skill set. How can you get better at being a leader, being persuasive, telling your story, engaging people to a point where they want to follow what you have to say?
Teach me.
Teach me.
I want to know. Great. So we're going to talk more about how you've done that work and what you've learned from it in working with all types of businesses. But tell us more about Chip first. So how did you acquire these skills and this expertise? It's such a unique and powerful weapon to have at your disposal. Where did it come from?
Right.
Where did you start and how did you get here?
Right. So started off in the FBI. So I spent 22 years as a special agent and hostage negotiator. I started my career over at the Washington, D.C. field office, and where I worked espionage, fugitives, drug cases. And then in 2004, I transferred over to the New York City field office, where I led their hostage negotiation team. So it was in that kind of atmosphere where I was thinking to myself toward the end of my career, like, I bet there's something here that I could use that would be applicable to business leaders. And so I was speaking to a professor over at Columbia University. His name is Robert Bontempo. And I was talking to him about some of the things I've been doing. He works in negotiations as well. And he was like, this has so many applications in the business world. You really need to start developing this and thinking about this. So it was taking from that world. And what's interesting, and this is I know you're going to get to, is that I met my co-founder, Adele Gambardella, and this was August, like 5 years ago, and met her at
before the pandemic.
Right.
2019.
Yes, and we met at an entrepreneurial dinner, and it was one of those small things where you're going around the room and introducing yourself.
Silicone production.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And so we started talking about what our backgrounds were, how it would mesh, and then that was like August, 5 years ago. And then she started asking me questions. We started talking on a regular basis and said, what did you learn in Quantico? What did you learn as an agent? What did you learn as a hostage negotiator? And at some point, she decides, okay, we've got enough. I said, enough for what? She goes, we have enough for a business, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to put together a master class, and we're going to hold it in New York City. I said, okay. And she says, and we're going to do it in 3 months. And to the day, it happened. That's kind of Adele's specialty. I mean, she implements. She has a marketing and PR background. She knows how to put things together and advertise. And we sold that thing out. We did it again in D.C. In fact, it was right after the first masterclass in New York City that I went with your group over to Portugal.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right, with Samsung. So, yeah, that's how it all came together. So the book comes out of that experience, out of Adele's background, my background, and the things that she saw in the business world, the needs of, what is it really when the most important thing that you can do when you lead an organization is you've got to convince people. We do it every day. And we would say, again, it's a little bit different than what we normally think of as a negotiation. But that's a long
So I want to dive. No, that's exactly what we need. And I think there's, even in what we heard from Chip there, a couple of interesting things for listeners to pay attention to. Those two things are, number one, a lot of entrepreneurs are not coming from a place of intending to be. Right? And when they find themselves as a co-founder or a CEO or a COO or anything else, they're finding themselves drawing on their non-executive experiences to be successful. So can you tell us more first about the day-to-day of your work on the FBI, leading those teams in D.C. and New York, so we can understand what you were drawing from as you serve executives now. And then the second thing I want to hear about is the decision to partner. Right? This is something that speaks to me as someone who's been a solo entrepreneur for a long time, has had failed partnerships, and now we're going to get it right? In this merger between WEVE and Cela. And I think a lot of the opportunity in succeeding as a business comes from effective partnership. It's also one of the biggest risk factors. 76% of businesses fail because of the partnership at the center if it doesn't work out. So I would love to hear more about that decision. So first, can you tell us what was your day-to-day in these negotiation teams?
Right. Yeah. So the whole thing comes from the skill set, right? It's you can be called about any time of day when you're in the FBI to work anything. So for my team as a hostage negotiator, everyone knows their role. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do. The team itself is composed of different members, and the rotation goes something like this. There's a main negotiator, there's a coach that's right next to the negotiator. These are all terms that businesses are familiar with, right? There's a team leader that makes sure that everybody's functioning at a high level and getting what they need. There's investigators assigned to that. There is also a person assigned to liaison. There's a person assigned to intel. So these are people that are keeping track of what's going on, what's the status of the situation of the crisis event. What is the hostage taker asking for? What are their danger zones? What are the kind of things that are going to set them off? What are the things that they like? All these things we're going to keep track of. And then you also have the on-site commander. So that's the person in charge of, let's say it's a prolonged situation. It's going to go several days. You're going to eventually have somebody that's got to
that up front. You generally have a sense of how.
It can, right? It's like, there clearly something that is involves a lot of people, right? Event where, let's say they've got a compound, or, it's a kind of different kind of movement. Mm-hmm. So all kinds of things can cause that to come into effect. But the idea for the hostage negotiation team is that they're all highly trained individuals and they all know what they're supposed to do. And that's kind of a key principle, was that everything I did in the Bureau, whether it was as an agent or as a hostage negotiator, whatever the role was for that day, it was always in teams. It was always pulling from the strengths and the gifts and the graces of other people to make the whole thing work. And that's something that,
the analogy is clear.
Right. I think so, right? I think so. And you're all working toward a mission. The mission, again, is clear as a bell. You know what you're supposed to do. Everyone is striving toward that effort. And I guess the other thing is about the leadership that's involved in that, is that there's an emotional intelligence that you develop as a result of, just your day-to-day world. But when you bring it into the context of, let's say you're a startup, and you know that there are certain tasks you have to get done in a day, or there's so many meetings you've got to hold, and there's so many people you have to talk to. Well, if you don't have the emotional read, if you're not able to what we call forensic listening, it's in our book, if you're not able to understand somebody from 4 different perspectives, and we call it like this, from an emotional standpoint. So when you're engaging with maybe a possible client or your team, you're always gauging where they are, what they're speaking to, what points do they really get invested in. Then you're going to be listening to their themes. Everyone, when they're passionate about something, or have a problem, is going to have a theme that they're going to develop. And we know that if somebody says something more than once in a conversation, it's important to them. And if it's important to them, it better darn well be important to you. Because that is the thing they really want to talk about, right? And if you miss that, if you turn the page before reaching there, you're in trouble because you haven't really connected to that person. So if they're escalated, you need to talk about what's on their mind. And the other two happen to be about body positioning. And we differentiate body positioning from body language in that we're all creatures of movement within the context of the world that we're in. So we know that if I'm really animated and I'm talking about, client development, you're going to hear that. That's my thing. But if, I'm just talking about, we need to, hold people accountable and my voice is going down, which is the final thing, right? All these things, when you bring them together, you get a holistic person and what they're about. And then there's other methods on how to connect with them from there. But those are the basics.
Yeah, again, there's just so much depth there in terms of the day-to-day of being an entrepreneur, because it might not be a fugitive negotiation, right? But your customer might be in a crisis situation.
Yes.
They may be in a panic. Or if you're managing your partner, how do you detect that they're in panic and what it is about? Or if it's an employee or a team member or anyone else adjacent to the business, this is something that I think to be an effective leader you've got to be thinking of and aware of. And you said before something really interesting I want to get a little bit clearer on, which is, it's clear what we're here to do, right? When you enter the convincing phase or the negotiation moment. And, how do you achieve that? Because I imagine the problem is clear. I don't imagine what we do is clear. Mm. And I think that's something that we see our startups run into on a day-to-day basis, and then certainly as a company ourselves, we're challenged by at times. So what kind of work do you do to identify what the problem is and what needs to be done, and then creating alignment around that?
Great question. And the answer for that is that you allow the person to tell you what it is. For example, you're dealing with, like you say, a partner, coworker, and there's some bad vibes going on. You're sensing something that's not quite right. So you're gonna sit down and you're going to discuss, what that is. But you're not going to hit it on the nose. You're going to try to go around. You're not going to direct. You're going to go at obliques. And because when we go direct at somebody who perhaps doesn't want that, their culture might be different from that, or their upbringing might be different from that. But there's good ways of testing that water and finding out what that is. The key here is that you always allow for creativity. So if we're in a negotiation zone, let's say, it's never about, and this thing I always say, John, is that I never negotiated with anyone. That was not my job. My job was to convince that person with a gun to somebody's head to value what I valued. And so that meant, all right, I value peace, obviously. I value that everyone leaves here alive today. And I value that this person come out and surrender to me peacefully. Now, how did I get there? First, I took up his concerns. And I think the problem that a lot of people start with is that they go directly to the thing that's going to be the kind of like trigger for them. For a hostage negotiator, that's a gun. If I'm thinking, as I'm talking to that individual, that he's got a gun to somebody's head, and he's got 7 people in that room, I'm lost. I can't focus on the gun. I have to focus on the individual. Because if that's the only one that's going to help through this process, right? If I'm focusing on the thing that's triggering, for some people it might be, I've got to close this deal. I've got to hit, my next round of financing. I've got, whatever that is, that's your gun. Get rid of it, get it off the table, and start focusing on what is it that I'm going to bring to this individual, to this company, to this VC. And then that way, you're able to abandon some of the stresses and strains and fears, really, because fear takes over. And when that happens, that's a bad situation.
Well, I mean, that's so powerful, because I can see 2 moments of vulnerability in that approach, right? One is creating space to hear what the other person wants, and then trusting that. I think if, one thing that can be challenging in a moment like that is, well, is this person really telling me the keys to solving the problem, right? But finding out what those pressure points are and registering them and accepting them, and then B, opening the door to what you need.
Yeah.
That binary I already am eager to test out myself. So
that whole thing with finding out, getting to that real thing, and what that person is, we call that the unstated narrative. And the unstated narrative is the disconnect between what somebody actually believes about you, your service, your company, your offering, and what they're willing to tell you to your face, right? And so if you're in a problem, there's something amiss with the client, the team member, whoever,
the hostage taker,
you're going to try to get as close as you can to what their problem is, to what that unstated narrative is.
And is therein the effectiveness of the convincer, their ability to detect or work around whatever the unstated narrative is?
Yes, and it is the fact that they are seeking to do that. They want to understand that person better. Not that they're going to completely get there in the moment of that meeting, right? But that they're trying. And you know what happens when, say right now, for example, you have no other distractions, right? I know your cell phone isn't out. I know somebody isn't going to break through that door and say, hey, John, I got to grab you for a quick meeting. You're giving me your undivided attention. That kind of attention is so rare today. And when we are engaged with somebody, we know it's important to them. When we can give them that kind of attention, it registers, right? Because everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be heard. And when you do that and you're giving the space, right, for them to talk, for them to this is important. I just want you to know everything that you share with me today stays with me. And I honestly want to get to a better situation for both of us. How do we start that? And what got us here today? You start off on something like that, you're already ahead of 90% of the people in their lives. When you start with some of the dynamics that we talk about in the book and what we're fleshing out here, you're going to be in the top 1% with that individual. It's a huge advantage.
And this is on the cusp of, I think, one of the most powerful things we see founders talk about after they interact with Chip and Adele is this idea of empathy as a weapon.
Oh yeah,
right. And what you're stating with what you're getting at with the unstated narrative, with the sort of claim around value and goals and alignment is really crafting that weapon for the situation. Is that?
Oh, that's great.
That correct?
That's great.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, great. So, I think we've got a much better sense now of how you're leveraging these experiences into executive situations. Let's talk a little bit more about the partnership.
Yeah.
It's clear that from square one, you appreciated Adele's ability to really commit to understanding your value add and then envisioning how that could come together in a masterclass. Doing a masterclass together is different than starting a company together, and it's different than authoring a book together. So can you bring us closer to that decision and process?
Oh, yeah. So for me, it was really easy. I was lucky. I happened to go to this entrepreneurial dinner. Adele happened to be there. We started talking. And for me, I am, we talk about also in the book, what kind of convincer are you? Are you more emotional? Or are you fact-based? Everybody's got a leaning. I get vibes from people, right? I'm big on that, right? And if I get a sense from somebody, and I know that there's certain things that my brain is subconsciously looking for, right? And we've identified some of those things, how to do that intentionally. But you're always activating that part of yourself whenever you meet somebody. So, that spidey sense thing that we talk about, that's a real thing. We can develop that. We can get better at that. And there are ways to do that. But, like you said, so when Adele started taking an interest in my background and what I did, and then I saw how she was putting it together for the business case, I'm like, this makes a whole lot of sense. And there was an easy flow, give and take between us. It felt, it was a lot of fun. I looked forward to those connections, right? And so, right, we did the masterclass. And again, going to your point, it's a little bit different than a partnership. We hadn't decided at that point. We're just kind of testing these waters, seeing where things go, seeing about product market fit. And then COVID hit right after the last masterclass. As you know, we were in contact. And Adele said, all right, we got a lot of downtime, right? Things aren't as fast paced. So what we're going to do is write a book. And we're going to codify everything that we've been talking about, right? All the IP that we developed, all the scenarios we put together, all the crisis work and the immersive training work, we put it together. And that's what we did during COVID. Now, COVID itself was definitely a low point, right? Because in terms of our crisis work, COVID was like the weather. Everybody was experiencing it at the same time. So nobody thought, it would be a good idea to bring a crisis team in because, COVID is hitting. No, everybody was dealing with it, right? So it just happened to be like, that's the room temperature, that's just how it is. So not having that as a means of testing out new things, of working with clients at that level, definitely a low point. But once we got out of COVID and things started picking up, we had more opportunities to connect, to speak, to get out there and test the market. So, yeah.
So a ton of interesting moments there, right? Because we've got an aspect of timing. We've got an aspect of complementary skills, and we've got an aspect of communication. You said one of the things that really inspired you to the partnership was the fact that it was easy to communicate, and I think this is something that's just huge for founders because we can both speak the same language technically. We can both be English speakers, or both be Japanese speakers, or both be French speakers, and fundamentally be unable to communicate.
Oh yeah.
And there is that spidey sense portion of it and other really intangible elements that allow us to know when we're able to communicate with somebody. And sometimes that's there to different extents with different individuals in different negotiations and convincings. So you had that sense. And then it sounds like there was an understanding of, well, this person is seeing opportunities to commercialize the knowledge that we have together and the value that we can create, and I'm interested in building on that. Is that a piece of it as well?
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
And then there was the compression moment of COVID to really test that, and it got through. So here we are.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, would love to get to sort of the next segment of our conversation here, which is what have you seen in doing this work with entrepreneurs? What's one of the moments in your process in building the company that's been the most positive? What's been one of the most difficult moments? And could you name one of those moments for a company that you've worked with, and tell us a story about a company that brought you in and that you were able to impact?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting is that when I first started working with Adele in the crisis communications world, because up to then I'd just primarily been doing training, on using the hostage negotiation experience and doing some advisement. But it's when I got involved in the crisis communications work that it just kind of befuddled me, and here's what I mean by that. First started working together. She brings me in. It's I guess about a mid-size educational institution that has different kind of a service offering. So they're helping executive leaders with executive education. They're upskilling people and so forth. Well, there was a moment when I was brought in that one of these companies that was working with this institution was in crisis mode, and Adele said, "Listen, I need you to come. We got this meeting, and I want to get your sense of what's happening here." So it's the first meeting. I go into the boardroom, and Adele's already there, and there's a fairly large group, about 10, 11 people in that room. And here's what I saw, John. I saw there were about 4 people over in a corner, and they were in tears. And there was another group that was sitting at the table. They were somewhat connected. You could see there was communication between them, but they were mostly staring ahead. And then there was a few people that were just there around the table, but they were like looking down at the table like all hope was lost. So I'm thinking for sure, somebody's dead, right? That's why I'm here. Somebody, just the tone of that room is bad. So I leaned over to Adele and I said, "So what are we dealing with? How bad is this? What's the body count?" She goes, "What?" I said, "What's happened here?" She said, somebody sent an email that they weren't supposed to. I said, and I'm looking around that room, and I'm thinking, oh boy, right? This is different. But it was a critical thing. It was a critical event for them. It did, if it had gone unchecked without, Adele diagnosing, figuring out what the problem is and how to attack it, it would have been disastrous. But I saw the same thing Adele was seeing, and I'm thinking, there's been some mass casualties here. That's how things hit people, right? Stress is relative. My day-to-day world, I dealt either with dangerous people, violent people, or, life and death situations. This, for them, was life and death, right? And so that to me was interesting, is that, okay, this really is true. Stress is relative, and how you deal with people in that, it's the same thing. It's the same way to de-escalate people, to get their minds back off of like the caveman brain back onto the analytical brain, right? And get them back in the game. So that was, and helping that unfold and working well with their teams and getting.
Well, yeah, tell us, what did you do?
Well, so
right.
this is about getting the people together that have been affected by it. So email goes out. And so the constituents that have been affected and offended, those are the people that we needed to talk to. And it was about, let's have that meeting, set up those meetings, let's let them talk. But there's ways of training the people that are going to be engaged in that conversation. So the company people that are represented here and the stakeholders that are being brought in that were affected, the company people have a different role. And their role is more than just to apologize. They need to do that, and they better have been doing it up to that point. But it's also going to be, listen, I need to understand how badly did this affect you? Like, please tell us, and don't hold anything back. Tell me about that. To do that, it's the same training I had as a hostage negotiator. You have to disconnect from what you normally would do. The training, that's why the training here is so important. Because what all we want to do, except for people that are trained to do differently, like John, is going to be defense. Look, okay, I hear what you're saying, but listen, you got to know, that wasn't from me. I didn't intend to that. Nobody cleared that. Nobody cares, right? The person that's sitting there has to take responsibility, has to be willing to listen to those bad things that are going to come at them, right? The vomit that's going to ensue, and just deal with it and accept it. And then as you're listening, like we suggest with forensic listening, with empathy, with the unstated narrative, you're going to move them to some point, because all they want to do first is attack. Allow the attack to happen, because what it is, just words, right? Allow them to vent, expel that, and then it's going to be, okay, so how do we start to improve this? But it first starts with there. Then it's messaging. Then it's coordinating the leaders to make sure that everybody's on task. Everybody knows from that point on what they need to send out, how they need to interact with these people. But it takes a minute. Yeah.
So there was kind of two elements of creating a solution here. One was, well, we need to divide out the players in this situation and get them talked to as individuals to understand, the scope of damage and open them up to finding a solution. And then the second piece was working with the other individuals in the situation to handle those conversations in a way that could create that space.
Yes, absolutely.
And what happened?
Well, then everything becomes minimized, right? What first looks like an impossible blow-up that threatens the existence of that organization now is a dust-up, right? But it takes time to get there. And people have to be willing, and that's one of the things that we talk people through in a crisis comm situation, is that there's going to be a number of days that are going to be very bad. But you still have to stay the course, trust the process, because there'll be ebbs and flow as things you might get a great email from somebody got a great phone call and they appreciate it, and then there's somebody else who's on social media and they are tearing them down. So all those things have to be accounted for, but the most important thing is that people get the training and they trust in the process.
Such powerful stuff. And whether it's in stories like these, and the lectures that you've given, or the workshops that you've run where founders are challenged to experience this themselves with a phone negotiation, it all comes to life really quickly. And I think one maybe under-discussed aspect of this, especially from a founder's point of view, is it's a super lonely position. And a lot of the conversations that you're having as an executive, as a co-founder, as a leader of any kind, are the hard conversations that you need to have with the people involved when they're not in the room. And you have those conversations up here. And that's where a lot of the, I think, mental pain of solving these situations, of day-to-day being a founder or an entrepreneur, comes from. So you talked earlier about how, well, if you let yourself focus on the gun in the hand of the hostage taker, at the head of the hostage, you're going to lose. And that speaks to me as somebody who can easily focus on the gun when I get concerned.
Oh, absolutely.
So, to what extent is negotiation also about managing yourself, and are there any tools for that you've put forward with?
100%, and it's something that Adele and I we've been talking about recently, because we know this is something that's vitally needed as an offering for people. Emotional regulation. I mean, we rise and fall on a day-to-day basis about how we perceive ourselves in the world, and how we think people are perceiving us, and the problems that we are facing, right? We know that there are things that happen to us in the day-to-day context that can tear us down, that feel like they're insurmountable, and it's all on us. And somehow, because we can't put all the pieces together by ourselves, we're at fault, right? And what we do in this is, whenever you're dealing with somebody else, we have to understand is that person doesn't have that context. That person doesn't know what you're dealing with. That person doesn't know the highs and the lows that you've experienced. So when they're coming at you, and you've got this mountain that you have been facing all day, struggling with, and you've got somebody coming in and they've got a real problem that they need solved right now, and it has nothing to do with the mountain peak that you're dealing with, is that you have to be able to be in control of your own emotional regulation, because that transfers out. What you are feeling, if you allow that negative portion of it, that hostile portion, that you push that out, you're losing as a leader. The leader has to be the person that presents as calm, at peace, and is pursuing the ends that the organization needs to. That includes that individual. Whoever that is and whatever position they have, you have to radiate that.
The individual being the leader of themselves.
Yes, exactly. So you need time. If you're feeling that, 45 minutes, it's not always possible, but you need to take a break. When you have overwhelmed to the point where your circuits are going to go, you've got to disconnect quick, go outside, take a walk, but you also need to invest in yourself as well on a regular basis. You need to, kind of gate off time and put it on a calendar so that you are developing your own time to, hey, I know that if I don't get 40 minutes of exercise in a day, I'm a mess. And sleep the same way. I've got to run these meetings till 11:30, and where am I? But you've got to protect those areas so that you can function at the level you need to.
Yeah, it's such a big part of the game, and I think in the same way that an executive needs to prioritize the tone in which they're communicating with the situation around them, they also need to do that as they communicate with themselves. So we're at the end of our time, unfortunately. What is one thing you would advise individuals to keep in mind as they struggle with these challenges in their own life and as they think about how to work with the convincing company?
I really think it's perspective. And because we think that whatever we're facing today is the end-all and be-all of our lives. It's like, this is it, right? We're at DEFCON 1. It's like, no, it's not, right? You're going to wake up the next day. It doesn't matter what's happened. You're going to live again. So the idea here is that if you put things in perspective, then what comes at you isn't that big a deal. So for me, it was, does anyone have a gun to their head? No? Okay, it's a good day, right? And if you focus like that, and you get the training that you need, you see these little pieces that might be missing, or this is where I'm having difficulty. There is a solve. There is always a solve. There's always a person. There's always something, a training, a course, a confidant you can talk to that is going to help you through that. Just remember that it's perspective.
And that convincing company is one of the places that you can go.
Absolutely.
To figure that out. Everybody for joining today. Please find out more about Chip and the Convincing Company and ways to activate their expertise and support and the information provided around this podcast. Do the same with us at Quay. If you're a founder of any kind, there's a place for you in our ecosystem. So get in touch, apply. We'd also like to thank Serendipity Labs, a great co-working space here at Grand Central in New York City, but also that organizes spaces all over the community here in the city and beyond, for hosting us and being a great partner in producing this podcast.